Good evening and a warm welcome to all for the monthly clinical meeting of the Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Delhi, organized virtually by Institute of Obs and Gynae, Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. On behalf of Jagsonpal Pharmaceuticals Limited, makers of injection Maintain 500 and 250, hydroxyprogesterone caproate and Maintain tablets, Elastrol 5 mg, the only progesterone approved by US FDA for preterm birth, Lycorette soft gels in having anti-oncogenic properties, and Dynogest 2 mg tablets for medical management of endometriosis as Endoreg. I'm Dr. Vipin Tyagi, along with my teammates, Dr. Deepika Chavda and Mr. Amit Saxena. We wish to thank Chairperson and HOD, Dr. K. Gujral, for this opportunity to host the meeting. We are sure the topics to be discussed will throw light on the dilemmas in management of rare carcinoma cases. Welcome to all faculty present with us today, AOGD members and all attendees from across India and abroad who have joined us today. Please keep posting your queries by text in the Q&A box, which will be answered at the end of the session. Please note, this webinar is brought to you as knowledge sharing initiative by Jagsonpal Medical Services, and this session is streaming on Facebook Live. The recording will remain on Jagsonpal's YouTube channel for reference and promotion. I will now request AOGD President Dr. Mala Srivastav to kindly initiate the proceedings.
Good evening, everyone. I bring greetings from AOGD and I welcome everyone to this monthly meeting from Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. First of all, I must congratulate the newly elected president of AOGD 21-22, Dr. Achla Batra of Safdarjung Hospital, and Dr. Jyotsna Suri, Vice President-elect of 2021 and 2022. This corona crisis continues and the winter winds have started coming. But our academic activities will also continue in its own pace. We wish all the AOGD members Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. After this monthly meeting, we'll be meeting in the new year 2021. 1st January is the meeting by ESI Vasai Darapur. Hope our new year is better off in terms of health and academics. Now I request Dr. Kanika to read the Secretary's report. Over to you, Dr. Kanika.
Thank you, Dr. Mala. Yeah, good evening, everybody. We welcome you to the monthly AOGD meeting at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, and it is my privilege and honor to be giving the Secretary's report today. Dr. Mamta is busy with a COVID case, so I am on her behalf presenting the report. We've had till now in the year 2020, 9th monthly annual meetings from AOGD. 29th May from BL Kapoor Hospital, 26th June from Safdarjung, 31st July was AIIMS, 14th August LHMC, 28th August Army and RNR Hospital, 11th September Indraprasth Apollo Hospital, 25th September DDU, 27th September November MAMC, and 18th December now from Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. We've had 4 AOGD executive meetings in the year on 24th April, 23rd June, 14th August, and 31st October 2020. These are the list of events that we've held under the banner of AOGD in November and till date December 2020. On 28th of November, we had a virtual CME on diabetes in pregnancy, providing optimum care, which was hosted by Lady Harding, Department of Obs-Gynae, Lady Harding Medical College, Quality Improvement and Safe Motherhood Committee of AOGD, and under the banner of AOGD with Delhi Gynae Forum. On 29 November 2020, there was a virtual CME on Sankalp Traveling Workshop for Family Planning, Updates in Contraception Part 1. 10th of December was a webinar on the talk on frequently asked questions on ovarian cyst under the banner of AOGD. 12th of December 2020 was a webinar on mastering the art of difficult obstetric maneuver, breech, shoulder dystocia, and fetal extraction during cesarean delivery, hosted by the Department of Obs-Gynae, UCMS, and GTB Hospital, with FOXI, AOGD, and the Medical Education Committee. 17th of December was a webinar on the diagnosis and management of GDM and approach to breast lump under the aegis of Delhi Gynae Forum North and Multidisciplinary Committee of AOGD and the Breast Committee of FOXI. The forthcoming events of AOGD are the Endoscopy Committee of AOGD with the Global Community of Hysteroscopy invites you to a webinar on 20th December. 20th December again, there's a 22nd Gynae update organized, which is by the IMA Janakpuri under the aegis of AOGD. 26th December would be a webinar on 11 to 14 weeks ultrasound and biochemical markers, along with the Christmas and New Year celebrations, and bidding farewell to COVID 2020 by the Federation of Obs Societies South Delhi in association with FOXI, Narchi Delhi, and AOGD together. We congratulate on behalf of AOGD and Sir Gangaram Hospital, Dr. Achla Batra, who's been elected President-elect AOGD 21-22, and Dr. Jyotsna Suri, Vice President-elect of 21-22. Forthcoming AOGD next virtual meeting would be on 1st of January 2021, organized by ESI Hospital. Thank you. I now hand over to Dr. Gujral, Dr. Kamal Gujral, the Head of Department and Chairperson of the Institute of Obs-Gynae, Sir Gangaram Hospital, for further proceedings of the day. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. We invite you to attend this meeting. A warm welcome to you all. We have 4 interesting cases lined up. Dr. Chandra Mansukhani, Senior Consultant, is going to present the case of endometrial carcinoma with atypical metastasis. Dr. Sarmishta Garg, Associate Consultant, Institute of Obstetric Gynae, will present postmenopausal women with cervicovaginal agenesis with a rare form of mixed Mullerian mesenchymal epithelial tumor. Dr. Tarun Kumar Das would come to a case of pregnancy with carcinoma esophagus. And lastly, Dr. Punita Varadwaj will take you through a case series of laparoscopic ovarian salvage and oophoropexy in adnexal torsion. I hope you enjoy the meeting. We'll have the questions at the end of the all the talks. Please put them in your chat box and we'll be happy to answer them. Dr. Chandra, I invite you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to present a case of endometrial carcinoma with atypical metastasis. Yeah, my patient is XY, Mrs. 51-year-old, para 2, living 2 with previous 1 LCS, consulted us in January 2020 with history of prolonged periods since 3 to 4 months. Bleeding used to last for 8 to 10 days and her cycles were of 25 to 28 days. She came with a pelvic ultrasound which was done outside, showing uterus almost normal size with a small fibroid seedling and increased endometrial thickness, that is 17.4. Ovaries were normal. Her previous cycles were normal with moderate flow. On general physical examination, there was nothing significant. On per abdominal examination, a small 5 into 6 centimeter soft cystic mass felt in the abdominal wall about 2 fingers below umbilicus on left side, and there was no organomegaly or ascites. On per spectrum examination, cervix was normal, LBC was taken. On per vaginal examination, uterus was bulky, retroverted, mobile, phonesis free, and the above mentioned mass, which was felt on the abdomen, was not felt in the per vaginal examination. LBC reported agus. All routine blood investigation, including mammography, all were done, which were normal. In view of the increased endometrial thickness and agus on the LBC, she was planned for the DNC hysteroscopy, which was done on 6 January. On hysteroscopy, cavity was regular, thick endometrium was noted at fundus. Both ostia were normal, endocervical canal was normal. Histopath report revealed complex atypical hyperplasia with foci of well-differentiated adenocarcinoma. With this report, the CA-125 and MRI whole abdomen were done. CA-125 was raised, that was 140. Here we can see the arrow is showing the tumor glands with the avascular area in the center. Now on the MRI, which was done outside, showed the upper abdomen normal, no free fluid, heterogeneous signal intensity mass lesion in the left abdomen extending to the pelvic cavity of size 70 into 52 into 57 millimeter. Left ovary could not be separately visualized. Right ovary was visualized, that was normal. Uterus was bulky with the irregular thickening of junction zone and large common and internal eye-like lymph nodes were also reported on MRI. Now, in view of this, what is the nature of, because it was suspicious of the abdominal mass, so true cut biopsy was done, which showed the metastatic adenocarcinoma with focal squamous differentiation, likely primary from the genital tract, possibly endometrium. So immunohistochemistry of the tumor cells were positive for the PAX8, CK7, and many ERPR receptors were positive. And it was negative for the CK20. As we can see, the arrow was showing the tumor glands, and this was a true cut biopsy. Now, to understand whether there is any distant metastasis in the anywhere else in the body, so PET scan was done, which showed the FTG, avid soft tissue mass lesion on the left side of abdominal cavity, abutting left parietal wall of size 5 into 7 into 5.2 centimeter, and FTG, avid left external and internal iliac lymph node, and mildly FTG, avid endometrial lesion were also reported on PET scan. The all other areas were negative. So in view of the diagnosis of the CA endometrium stage 4B, she was planned for the laparotomy, radical hysterectomy, and excision of parietal mass. Abdomen was opened by vertical incision as per protocol. On opening the abdomen, there was a 5 into 6 centimeter mass adherent to the parietal peritoneum and posterior rectal sheath adherent to the omentum, bowel loops, and left adnexa. Same separated and excised. The part of the omentum which was adherent to the mass was also excised. Total hysterectomy with BSO with bilateral pelvic lymph node sampling was done. On cut section, there was a very small 1 into 1.5 centimeter tumor was seen at fundus with no myometrial invasion on the naked eye examination. A post-op period was uneventful. As we can see here, this is a tumor mass from the abdominal walls was excised and sent for the histopathology. The final histopath report was endometrioid carcinoma with squamoid differentiation grade 2, myometrial invasion less than 50, that was only 5 millimeter, uterine serosa, cervix, cervical stroma, tubes, ovaries, bilateral parametrium, omentum, and lymphovascular spaces were free of tumor. The 2 out of left-sided lymph nodes showed the metastasis, and right-sided lymph nodes were free of tumor. The left parietal mass, metastatic carcinoma, same as the uterus. Immunohistochemistry of the tumor cells in the endometrium showed the patchy ERPR tumor cells, and it was negative for the Nepsin A. The cytology was negative, and the pathological staging was PT1A and N1A and M1. And the figure staging was a stage 4B, T1A, N1, and M1. Here, this we can see here, the arrow is showing the myometrium, and the tumor glands are invading into the myometrium, but it is a very superficial. The another lower down arrow can show the fat cells down, and the tumor cells are invading into the abdominal wall. Now, so in the post-op period, she received 7 cycles of the paclitaxel and the carboplatin every 3 weeks. And in the end of the chemotherapy, and CA-125 was normal, followed by external beam RT 50 GY in 25 fractions, along with RT to left parietal lesion site, 25 GY over a period of 1 month. Then brachytherapy, 7 GY, 4 doses at the 4 days interval was given. In the follow-up, as we can see here, the CT was absolutely normal, and as up to this date, she is absolutely fine. Now, coming to the discussion, the cancer endometrium is the most common gynae malignancy in the developed countries, and it is the second most common in the developing countries. The majority are symptomatic, and they present very early. There are 2 types. Type 1, which is common in the 80% of the patients, that is endometrioid histology grade 1 and 2, type 2, which is seen in the 20%, grade 3 endometrioid or other varieties, including the papillary serous, mixed, clear cell carcinoma, mucinous squamous, transitional, mesonephric, and undifferentiated. The metastasis can occur at the typical and atypical sites. The typical sites include pelvic and para-aortic lymph nodes, vagina, peritoneum, and lungs. Atypical sites include abdominal wall, muscle, which is seen in 2 to 6%, extra abdominal nodes 0.4 to 1%, spleen 1%, brain less than 1%, and very rarely it has been reported in the pancreas, adrenal, and appendix. Here, I would like to make an important point that majority of the reported metastasis in the literature, they were recurrences and they occur after the completion of the primary treatment. Only in the small subset, it has been reported with a NAV stage 3 and 4 as in our case. So when we search the literature regarding the atypical solitary metastasis of the endometrioid carcinoma, here we can see we found a few studies or case reports only where they showed the metastasis in the appendix, adrenal, spleen, and pancreas. Here we can see that when the grade was higher, then it was recur after early, so after 6 months, and latest by the 3 to 4 years. You see, even after the complete treatment, when it was a stage 3A, patient had the radical hysterectomy with pelvic and para-aortic lymphadenectomy. Even then, she had the metastasis in the pancreas. Now, so how and why abdominal wall metastasis they occur? The suggested theories were in the literature, like anterior abdominal wall, especially the umbilical region, has a rich arterial supply and anastomotic venous network, could be the hematogenous. Another study was lymphatic system drains cranial and caudal to several lymphatic chains, including pelvic and para-aortic nodes. And another theory was the direct peritoneal extension and spread through the embryonic remnants, like in our case, it could be, and retrograde passage of neoplastic cells through the fallopian tubes. And if there is a surgical injury, then neoplastic cells get implanted and they can give the recurrences. So when we search the literature regarding the abdominal wall and umbilicus metastasis, we could find few studies where they showed the metastasis in the umbilicus abdominal wall. You see, one interesting patient who was presented with a prolapse and she had hysterectomy. Later on, the report showed the endometrioid grade 3 C endometrium, and later on, she had the metastasis in the umbilicus. And another case, when patient had the diagnosed with a C endometrium, she had hysterectomy and brachytherapy, complete external radiotherapy also. But after 3 years, she had incisional hernia. She underwent the surgery and the wound was not healing. So the biopsy was done and it showed the metastasis at the repair area. Now, there were 2 studies which showed the coexisting metastasis with the C endometrium. The first case was reported in the 2006, where the patient presented with a fibroid with an umbilical hernia, and there was a umbilical nodule which was biopsies, and it showed the metastasis of the CA endometrium. And another case, which was second case reported in the Nolan in 2012, where there was a patient was having heavy bleeding, so endometrial biopsy could not be done. And they biopsied the umbilical nodule, and it was a metastasis of the undifferentiated papillary adenocarcinoma. And when abdomen was opened, the abdomen was full of metastasis, omentum was full of metastasis. So these were the only 2 cases in the literature which show, where the coexisting metastasis were seen, like our patient. Now, what is the Sister Mary Joseph nodule? It was named by the name of the sister who incidentally observed the umbilical nodule in patients with advanced cancer. The incidence reported in the literature is 1 to 3%, majority with the GI cancers, and the small proportion it has been reported with the gynae cancers also. In gynae cancers, it's the commonest with the ovarian cancer, that's 34%. With uterine cancer, it is only in the 12%, and with cervix in 5%. So coming to the overview and treatment of the metastatic endometrial cancer, the majority patients, they represent After the completion of the primary treatment of the localized disease as relapses or recurrences, only a small subset patient with de novo metastasis disease, like our case, naive stage 3 or stage 4, sign and symptoms according to the site of the cancer, and evaluation includes a complete whole abdomen CT or PET CT along with the CA-125. The biopsy of the lesion should be done to know the histology, ER/PR receptor, and the immunohistochemistry. The treatment includes a complete surgical excision, should be followed by the chemotherapy with the paclitaxel and carboplatin every 3 weeks for 7 cycles. The 2 drug regime is better than the 3 because 3 drug regime has a toxicity. In the high-grade diseases, the triple therapy has been advised, and monitoring should be done every 2 to 3 cycles with the CT and CA-125. If already the CA-125 was normal in the starting of the treatment, then there is no need to repeat. The RT should be given in the naive disease or in the patients who have not received the RT previously. Endocrine therapy includes the megestrol acetate alternate with the tamoxifen as a palliative therapy in the patients wherever it is indicated. Thank you. Now I hand over to Dr. Sharmishta to present her case.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting the second case, which is a postmenopausal woman with cervicovaginal agenesis, and she had a rare form of mesenchymal epithelial tumor. This lady was a 46-year-old female who was admitted on 25th of July with complaint of pain in lower abdomen, on and off, and low backache with increased frequency of micturition since April 2020. She did not give any history of hot flushes, vaginal dryness, or any other genitourinary complaints. When we took the menstrual history, she revealed that she was a case of primary amenorrhea, and at the age of 16, she was diagnosed with cervicovaginal atresia, as she had intermittent cyclical pain since the age of 40. She had no biological child, and her past medical history revealed she had history of abdominal cocks in 2000, for which ATT was given for 1 year. When we went through her past surgical history, she underwent multiple episodes of laparotomy, followed by vaginal reconstruction, vaginal molds, and then finally at the age of 21, she started getting her menses monthly. But she could not produce any records. After that, she was all right for about 6-7 years, but again in between, she was having menstrual complaints, for which again laparotomy, EUA, cervical dilatation were done in between. And finally, at the age of 38, it was in 2012, her menses stopped finally. After which she visited her gynecologist in somewhere outside. Then she was told that she has now attained menopause and no further checkup was advised to her. When we went through her family history, she had one sibling, was her brother, and he had single kidney. And on gross physical examination revealed everything was normal. When we did the PS, it was a blind vagina of about 6 centimeters, and the upper part was stenosed because of atresia. And on per rectal examination, we could feel a 6-week size bulky uterus. When we went through investigation, her metabolic profile was normal. CA-125 was borderline raised, it was 44. And since she was menopausal, it was confirmed by her FSH and E2 report. FSH was very high, it was 97, E2 was quite low. She showed us an outside ultrasound film, which was done in her hometown, which revealed a polypoidal mass arising in the uterus along with hematometra. Since ultrasound was already done outside, we went for an MRI, which revealed that there was a pond-like 3 by 4 centimeter polypoidal mass arising from the fundus as well as from the right lateral wall. And along with there was a hematometra, and there was little breach in the endometrial and the myometrial junction. So the same report. And the final impression they gave was an endometrioid carcinoma, highly suspicious of endometrial carcinoma. So since she was a case of cervical and vaginal atresia, there was no way we could have done an hysteroscopy or a DNC. So we planned her for her examination under anesthesia with a diagnostic laparoscopy, and then we proceeded with total laparoscopic hysterectomy with bilateral adnexectomy. And the specimen was delivered through a mini laparotomy incision. So when we went inside during the laparoscopy, we could see there was dense omental adhesions to the anterior abdominal wall, which were released. Initially, we could not see the uterus because the bowel wall are adhered to the lateral pelvic wall. Bowel wall adhered to each other bowel loops, and they were forming a wheel over the uterus, and the fundus was not visualized initially. When we did adhesive we could see the fundus of the uterus, and then the hysterectomy was completed. Bilateral tubes and ovaries could not be made out separately initially because they were forming bilateral ovarian masses, tube ovarian masses. So we did hysterectomy with bilateral adnexectomy. And while dissecting the uterovaginal junction, because there was no vagina, so when we were dissecting the uterovaginal junction, we found out that there was a rent in the rectum, which was confirmed on doing a PR examination. And that was closed in the same setting in 2 layers by using 3-0 Vicryl. And the specimen was retrieved by giving a mini laparotomy incision, and that was sent for frozen section. So these are the operative procedure we had. And on frozen section, it was revealed that this tumor is a mixed malignant Mullerian tumor. So with this report, since it was a difficult case with previous so many laparotomies, so we thought of doing a bilateral pelvic lymph node sampling also in the same setting. So lymph node samplings were done from both sides. And when we removed the specimen, we could see there was a large exophytic mulberry type growth arising from the fundus as well as the right lateral wall. It was quite necrotic with hematometra. There was no cervix. Then we sent the specimen for final histopathological paraffin block report. Post-op period was uneventful. After giving thromboprophylaxis, she was discharged on post-op day 6. Now came the histopathology slides. This revealed that this is a biphasic tumor. It had mixed mesenchymal as well as epithelial elements. The epithelial one was non-malignant benign component, and it was forming a phalloid-like, giving a phalloid-like structure, and the cyst contained the mucoid material. And the stromal part was hypercellular, and this was the malignant one. So macroscopy revealed that there was this myometrium was not infiltrated. Mitotic figures were there, and it was a biphasic tumor. Pelvic lymph nodes were all negative for tumor. Immunohistochemistry showed that the stromal cells were negative for CD10 and EMA. And Ki67 proliferative index was about 4 to 5% in the periglandular zones. So these are the immunohistochemistry photographs. And the final diagnosis, which gave us, was a low-grade Mullerian adenosarcoma of uterus. Parametrium were free of tumor, and both pelvic lymph nodes showed reactive changes, and there were no tumor seen. Now, in the post-op period, we got a PET CT done, and which also showed only reactive post-operative changes and no metastasis. We consulted our medical oncologist and the radiation oncologist, and the decision was taken that no further treatment is required in this case. Since it was a low-grade tumor, no treatment was required in this case. So in the discussion part, I would like to say this is quite a recent tumor, recently diagnosed tumor. The first case was reported in 1974 by Clement and Schooley, and the incidence is quite low. Overall, the uterine sarcomas present about 1.5 to 3 per 1 lakh of uterine malignancies, and out of which this uterine adenosarcomas presents about 5% of all uterine sarcomas. These are usually tumors of low malignant potentials. They usually occur in age group of 50 to 60 years, and they originate mainly from the endometrium, but really it can arise from ovaries and cervix also. Now, this is the recent WHO classification, which was given in 2019 for this malignant mesenchymal tumors, which includes leiomyosarcomas, low-grade endometrial stromal sarcomas, high-grade endometrial stromal sarcomas, undifferentiated uterine sarcoma, adenosarcoma, PEComas. These are perivascular epithelioid cell tumors, malignant variant of that. Pathology, as we already discussed in our case, it's a biphasic tumor with a malignant mesenchymal component and a benign epithelial component. And the endometrium and the epithelial part can resemble the secretory squamous clear or a mucinous type. Sarcomatous part, if it occupies more than 25%, these are referred to as the sarcomatous overgrowth, and they are associated with very high risk of recurrence and bad prognosis. Epithelial part exhibits estrogen and progesterone receptor expression, whereas sarcoma screens for activity. The rate of recurrence without sarcoma overgrowth is about 15 to 20%, whereas if there is sarcomatous overgrowth, the recurrence rate is about 75%. Deep bilateral invasion, lymph node involvement, and heterologous stromal components, they are at increased risk of recurrence. Mortality is about 10 to 5% without sarcomatous overgrowth, but if the sarcomatous overgrowth is there, it is about 75%. 5-year survival is in stage 1 is 60 to 80, whereas for stage 3 is about 48%. Now the treatment says hysterectomy without morcellation is the treatment. Their removal of adnexa, whether it should be done or not, it depends on the individual case-to-case basis. Pelvic and parotid lymphadenectomy, the role is not clear as the lymph node involvement is hardly 3 to 4%. There is no benefit of adjuvant therapy. Complete surgical resection has been done in these cases. Treatment of metastasis and recurrences the data is very limited. So the surgery with complete resection is the treatment. Radiotherapy is mainly given for palliation and local inoperable recurrences. The recurrences with sarcomatous overgrowth should be treated like high-grade endometrial stromal cancers, whereas recurrences without sarcomatous overgrowth should be treated as low-grade endometrial stromal tumor. The main idea of presenting this case in this forum was that if the patient is presenting with cervical agenesis, so first we should guide them properly to have regular checkups. Otherwise, this kind of tumor can be missed. Thank you for your patient hearing. Now I would like to call Dr. Tarun to present the third case.
Good evening, everybody. To my respected teachers and seniors and all my colleagues. Today, I am going to present a case. This 28 years lady, Gravida 3, Para 1, Living 1, with the Living 1 present to casualty with 36 plus 5 weeks pregnancy, with a previous history of cesarean section with complaints of hemoptysis, melena, dysphagia, and cough for last 1 month, now aggravated for last 4 days, along with the weight loss. She had one cesarean section 7 years back, and with a history of oligohydramnios with fetal distress for that, and one missed abortion 5 years back. Her present pregnancy was natural conception, and she had irregular antenatal care visits from outside due to pandemic. On examination, we found she was conscious oriented, afebrile. She had only tachycardia of around 110. BP was around 120 by 80. Respiratory rate was 18 per minute. On parabdominal examination, uterus was term size, relaxed. It was a breech presentation, and fetal heart was around 140 beat per minute. She had no scar tenderness. On paravaginal examination, we found that os was 2 centimeter dilated, cervix 40% effaced, membrane was absent, clear leaking was seen. Patient and her relatives were counseled for the need for emergency cesarean section in view of breech presentation with PROM with history of previous cesarean section. Decision for section was taken after the written and informed consent and high risk consent in view of hemoptysis, dysphagia, and everything. Her COVID status was negative, hemoglobin was 9.1, INR was 0.9, and PT-APTT were normal. Patient had undergone emergency cesarean section under spinal anesthesia, and she delivered a female baby of 2.1 kilo with a normal Apgar. She was shifted to NICU due to the transient tachypnea of newborn. Then we shift the patient to ward. We evaluated her in post-op period, immediate post-op period. Gastromedicine reference was taken, and she was advised upper GI endoscopy, HRCT thorax, which revealed a large esophageal growth, likely metastatic. In the same sitting, we did an esophageal biopsy, and the biopsy report confirmed a well-differentiated squamous cell carcinoma. We did a PET scan. It's a long segment of FDG avid heterogeneously enhancing circumferential mural thickening for mass formation involving upper, mid, and lower thoracic esophagus extending from D1 vertebra to gastroesophageal junction. Inferiorly, it was compressing trachea, bilateral main bronchus, right upper lobe bronchus, and with the collapse of the right upper lobe of lung. FDG with bilateral supraclavicular lymph nodes were there. FDG with osteolytic skeletal lesions with the associated soft tissue component involving C4 vertebra, likely metastatic with a mild proliferation was noted. This is the upper GI endoscopy picture. You can appreciate that the whole of the growth that inside the esophagus, it's all through the length of the esophagus, the growth was seen. This is the HRCT thorax pictures. This is the pulmonary metastasis, and this is the esophageal mass compressing the trachea as well as the main bronchus, left and right, both. So we sought for medical oncologist opinion, and she was planned for palliative chemotherapy after 3 weeks of cesarean section in view of advanced stage esophageal cancer with lung metastasis. She took discharge on request to complete her rest of the treatment from government hospital. On telephonic follow-up, it was found that she was planned for 6-cycle chemotherapy with the carboplatin and paclitaxel, along with a feeding jejunostomy. She already received 3 cycles of chemotherapy with that till now. Esophageal cancer is one of the leading cause of cancer-related death worldwide. Most complete resection of the esophageal cancer tissue with the surrounding malignant lymph node is the sole potential curative treatment. Pre-op staging is most important to determine the appropriate treatment modalities for this patient. Computed tomography is the first advised imaging. Esophageal cancer is seen very rarely during pregnancy. Incidence of the esophageal carcinoma ranges from 0.07 to 0.1% of all malignant neoplasms. The symptoms are usually misinterpreted as pregnancy-related symptoms. Consequently, the diagnosis is delayed and the patient admits to hospital in a very advanced stage. The practical guidelines for the treatment of gastric and intestinal cancer during pregnancy are available, while there is very limited data about the esophageal cancers during pregnancy. You et al. Reported the guidelines regarding the treatment of esophageal cancer that are very similar to the gastric cancer during pregnancy. If you diagnosed it at early stage, the treatment may be postponed in order to provide greater probability of the survival of the neonate. If you diagnose beyond 30 weeks of gestation, delivery has to be commenced if the fetus is viable, and then the radical resection of the gastric acid is performed. In our case, she was a 28-year-old with 36 plus 5 weeks of gestation with advanced carcinoma esophagus with pulmonary metastasis. The symptoms like vomiting, nausea, and the weight loss during first trimester of pregnancy are usually encountered, and these symptoms may obscure the disease. Also, the uterine fundus rises to umbilicus at around 20 weeks of gestation, and stomach is pushed up towards the diaphragm. So the symptoms become severe, and this compels the patient to come to you and us with a final diagnosis. Conclusion, the take-home message is gastrointestinal complaints during pregnancy should be looked at suspiciously, and especially in persistent cases. As in present scenario, malignancy should be kept in mind and further investigation should be performed. Thank you so much. I'll ask Dr. Punita. Ma'am, please.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, so ovaries are so precious for the gynecologist. Don't we know it all? I'll be talking about laparoscopic ovarian salvage and oophoropexy in adnexal torsion. Torsion was first described in 1891, a partial complete rotation of the ovarian pedicle on its long axis, which could compromise venous lymphatic drainage and ultimately the arterial supply. It is the fifth most common gynecological emergency, prevalence of 2.5 to 7.4%. It can occur in females of all ages, including children. Presence of cyst or mass, hyperstimulated ovaries, subfertility treatment, pregnancy are the predisposing factors. Recurrence rate is approximately 10%. It is suspected in cases of acute pain abdomen. It is diagnosed by history and a high index of suspicion. In 44% cases only is the diagnosis confirmed preoperatively. Conventionally, the management of choice was excision of tossed adnexa. But the conservative approach, that is detorsion, cystectomy, oophoropexy, and decongestion, carries the advantage to preserve ovarian function and fertility and decrease risk of premature ovarian failure or castration. So this study was carried out at Sir Gangaram Hospital over a period of 5 years from Jan 2015 to December 2020, and patients of all age groups were included. Patient data with age, history of previous surgery or torsion, duration of symptoms, predisposing factors, ultrasound, Doppler, tumor markers were taken into consideration. Time from onset of symptoms to surgery was also jotted down. Intraoperative findings were side, number of twists, and degree of necrosis. All cases could be managed laparoscopically. There was no conversions. The methodology used for the procedure was adnexal detorsion, cystectomy, bivalving, oophoropexy, plication of ovarian ligament, and fixing of ovary was done. We went through the Parelkar grading of ischemia, grade 1, 2, 3, 4. Grade 1 was discoloration slight. Size of the ovary was usually normal. Detorsion, on detorsion, there was normal color. Grade 2 was a dark red. Detorsion, hyperemic with multiple pinpoint petechiae. Grade 3 was brown or black in color, grossly enlarged with hematoma. And detorsion with hematoma evacuation, slight improvement in color with pinpoint oozing was seen. Grade 4 was black, blue ovary, grossly enlarged with hematoma, and detorsion or hematoma evacuation, there was no color change. So that's my data. Please skip to the next slide. That's my data about the predisposing factors and the duration of pain. We had 27 patients involved in the study. Next, please. Just carry on. This is the data. I'll summarize it in the next slides. Next. Carry on. Okay, so total cases were 27. Age premenarcheal were 2 cases, 9 and 11 years. Age 10 to 20 years were 4 cases, from 11 to 16 years. Age more than 40 were 3 cases. Rest reproductive age group, 18 cases. And pain was the predominant symptom in all. There was 1 pregnant patient with bilateral torsion. Next. So grades of ischemia that we saw was grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 in grade 1, 4 in grade 2, 8 in grade 3, and 12 in grade 4. The procedure done, like I said, was salpingo-oophorectomy in 6 cases, but we realized that all the salpingo-oophorectomy were confined to 2015. And gradually, as we progressed in our learning and the literature improved, so did our results of doing conservative surgery. Ovarian cystectomy was done in 18 cases, bivalving in 10 cases, and oophoropexy in 11 cases. Majority of the cysts were dermoid, 11 cases, serous cyst adenoma in 3 cases, mucinous in 2 cases, hemorrhagic corpus luteal cyst also can cause torsion, 5 cases, and malignancy in 1. So oophoropexy was done in cases of children, adolescent, PCOS, and heavy ovaries. Or it was done in case of prophylaxis where one ovary was lost already to oophorectomy and the other ovary had to be conserved at all costs. So main outcome measurement was ovarian rescue, any intraoperative or postoperative complication in the form of fever, thromboembolism, follow-up, ultrasound with Doppler flows on 1 month, 6 months, and 12 months. Next, please. There was no recurrence, all ovaries were viable, there was no intraoperative, postoperative complication, there were no conversions. And how did we see the viability? Ovarian blood flow, ovarian volume, and follicular development. So discussion. Treatment of choice lately endorsed detorsion, decongestion, bivalving, and oophoropexy. All ovaries in our study were rescued. Fady and Shockey could also manage to rescue all the twisted ovaries, irrespective of ischemia and the number of twists. Normal vascularity was seen only in 60% of Doppler cases. This was also seen in the data for Sasaki and Miller. Grade 4 necrosis was seen in 12 cases. Detorsion, decongestion, cystectomy was carefully and gently done in these cases. Parelkar et al. Also could manage to preserve all the ovaries. Therefore, the premise that ovary revives from the center to the periphery and there's never a complete arterial occlusion unless you've neglected it so much that all the vessels are twisted and gone. Literature also suggests a lack of correlation between onset of symptoms and onset of ischemia or infarction. So duration of pain cannot predict ovarian salvageability. Pain recall is unrelatable, but it stands to reason that better surgical outcomes are seen in early surgical intervention. So whatever the duration of symptomatology, early intervention is the key. Next, please. The cysts were present in 21 cases. Cysts were removed in all and sent for histopathology examination. So there was no need for an interval cystectomy. Similar to Edemi, Fawadi et al., cystectomy in grade 3-4 ischemia were more technically difficult, naturally, because the tissue planes were lost. All grade 3-4 ovaries on follow-up showed signs of recovery, viz. The size, the oocytes, and the ovulation. So there is no way to predict ovarian rescue. Next, please. I want to just dwell on oophoropexy. It is a controversial topic. It is fixing ovarian to the round ligament, fixing ovary to the pelvic side wall, fixing ovary to the uterosacral ligament of the posterior surface of the uterus, or ovarian ligament plication. All this comprises oophoropexy. Next, please. So you can see in the picture, that's the uterus, and you pass a stitch from the ovarian ligament through the avascular zone in the mesosalpinx, below the tube, onto the round ligament area, and tie it so that you're fixing the ovary to the round ligament. And that you can do by 1 stitch, 2 stitch, or 3 stitch, depending upon the length of the ovarian ligament. There is another technique called the hot dog bun technique, where the tube is in the center and the ovarian and the round ligament are fixed together. Next, please. Next, please. So that is a plication of the ovarian ligament. You see, you hold it, you fold it, and you tie it across either with absorbable or delayed absorbable sutures. A lot of failures have been seen with absorbable sutures. So they have used Ethibond and they've used Prolene, etc. also for it. Next, please. I have combined the ovarian ligament plication with fixing the inferior pole of the ovary. This retains the anatomy and hence tubo-ovarian relationship, needless to say, not affecting the fertility issues. Oophoropexy is done in case-selected cases. In children with usually long ovarian ligament or long salpinx, mesosalpinx, and mesovarium. Normal-looking ovaries where usually it is the long ovarian ligament which is a cause of torsion. Bilateral adnexal torsion. PCO because of the heavy ovaries, and heavy ovaries per se because of the congestion and edema. Previous oophorectomy for torsion, the contralateral ovary, meaning thereby whenever you recurrence, whenever recurrence is anticipated, you do a oophoropexy. Next, please. In pediatric population, 25% ovarian torsion have normal ovaries. Complication of oophoropexy is not well reported. They do talk about, necrosis, recurrences despite oophoropexy reported. Interval oophoropexy has also been suggested because of these failures, because of the edema and congestion. And management must be individualized to fit safety and preventative parameters. Next, please. So to conclude, ovarian rescue can be carried out despite late adnexal torsion presentation laparoscopically, at best preserving anatomy. I have the next slide for a video. It's just a 1-minute video. Next, please. Let it just run. So I'll just show you two cases. I think it was right adnexal torsion, where you have, it's a very common picture when you see, let it run, it'll just come. And you see twists at the infundibulopelvic ligament. You have a black and blue area. Just let it run. Okay, so that's the right tube and ovary, all torted up, sitting in the adnexa. And you see, you untort it basically. And there were 2-3 loops, and then you give an incision. The idea is to decongest the ovary. It is black and blue, but it's not all gone. They've seen 70% revivals. You know, that's a big number in cases of oophorectomy where they thought it's a goner. And here I'm using scissors, no energy sources required. You just lay open the ovary. That is called bivalving of the ovary. And this is oophoropexy, where I'm taking a number 1 victal stitch. I shorten the ovarian ligament, like you used to do a round ligament plication, and I fix it to the lower pole of the ovary in such a way that the tubo-ovarian relationship remains constant. That is, there are no fertility issues because of oophoropexy. And you handle it very gently, you know, you don't want to tear it open. So this is another case. You see how black the fimbria is, and gradually it regains torsion. Previously, it was thought that when you detort it, the color returns. If it doesn't return, you do a oophoropexy, oophorectomy. But here, we detort it. You see the tube that has changed color. It was black and blue, now it's pink. And you fix the ovary such that it doesn't tort again. And usually it's the normal ovaries which tort again. So that is it. Although you have narrowings, but just leave it alone. I think it's best to give the benefit of doubt to the patient and retain an ovary. Have you ever heard of a torsion testis being removed? It is always orchidopexy. So why not to the ovary? That's a Surgicel there. Hardly any bipolar or energy source is used. This is the pregnant patient, you know, very rare. What we did, we detorted it. It was bilateral. There were 3 flips. 1, 2, 3. You handle it gently. You follow all the precautions of laparoscopy in pregnancy. And then you do a cystectomy, you know. Just because you're pregnant, don't do a half job. I know it's tedious. I know it's difficult to get the hemostasis, but look at the results. No repeat surgery is required. And this lady delivered at term. This was Dr. Shweta's case. No problem. Thank you so much for the patient hearing.
Deepika, are there any questions or any comments? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah, no, I want to know if there are any questions,
Ma'am, there are
comments.
2 questions.
Yeah, there are.
I have one. Dr. Tarun has already answered. Is that so?
Yeah,
Tarun, come here.
I can read, ma'am, I can read out the
Yeah,
question.
please do. Please do.
Dr. Charu has asked what is LBC and AGUS, and Dr. Shalini
Dr.
Rajaram had commented that she would like to answer it live.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
and
no,
let
no,
me add
I
this.
just,
Let me add
I
this.
thought,
No better person than Shalini to answer this question.
I just saw it and I clicked on something and it said that you can answer live. And
No, you please answer.
it's something every gynecologist should know now, and LBC is a liquid-based cytology. And AGUS is atypical glandular cells of undetermined significance. So, so this is something everyone should know. So has that answered your question?
And ma'am, Dr. Charu has another question. Can we suspect the DD of SMA thrombosis and ask for Doppler study of the abdominal vessels in case of intractable vomiting?
Take up that. Tarun will take that up. He's already answered in the chat box. Tarun, take up that question. Tarun will take up that question.
Hello, ma'am. Actually, if we suspect about the DD, the first DD would have been a cholelithiasis. This is a very common thing we generally found during each and every ultrasound. Often we used to get that kind of thing. But if you suspect the superior mesenteric artery thrombosis, yes, definitely we can do a Doppler. In our case, we did an upper abdominal ultrasound also. I haven't mentioned, and it was perfectly normal. No hepatomegaly, no splenomegaly. So that's why I didn't mention. But we can. But the thing is, we have to rule out the cholelithiasis. It is very, very common. We generally picked up cholelithiasis with the intractable vomiting and everything. Thank you so much.
Kanika, any more
ma'am.
questions?
Yeah, ma'am, we have 4 judges for the day, Dr. Shalini Rajaram, Dr. Smita Rathore, Dr. Manju Khimani, and Dr. Rama Joshi. So we would request if they have any questions to ask to the speakers.
Kanika, I just want to speak to Dr. Punita. I just want to highlight one thing, I must congratulate her for collecting 7 cases of, torsion of the ovary, right? And we also had done a study where we had 7 cases all in the young girl, 10 years, 12 years. So what we found, what problem then faces that, when you retort the ovary and when you start dissecting the cyst, the first, as soon as you incise, so when you incise the topmost layer and then you come across the blood and you start dissecting, where is the cyst, so cyst wall is below that, so everybody should, otherwise you will be in a wrong turn and you will be only tearing the ovary. So that's the only point I want to highlight, and very nice collection.
Criticality of it, like you said, was it is difficult because the tissue planes are gone. The cyst is not going to pop out. You have to go beyond the hematoma, and anyways you have to evacuate the hematoma to reach the cyst. I think that's a dunner in cases of surgical cystectomies, because evacuation of hematoma is also required to decongest the ovary so that the stretch on the wall, the outer wall, is reduced and the blood flows start back, to revive the wall.
That's
Since Punita is here, I wanted to ask her, what did you do with the case of malignancy and the 2 cases of cystadenomas that you had? You said you didn't sacrifice the ovary in any case. There was 1 case of malignancy and 2 cases of serous cystadenoma, 1 case of serous cystadenoma and 1, I think, mucinous.
Yes. In those cases, in a malignancy, we had the consent. We had the consent in all these cases, we had the consent of salpingo-oophorectomy. Right.
No, but after salpingo-oophorectomy, what did you do in the malignancy case?
No, we did a complete surgery for her. We referred her to the oncologist. We did a salpingo-oophorectomy. We did a staging laparoscopy where we took the cytology and the peritoneal biopsies and the omental biopsy. And then
how did you suspect malignancy? Because you were doing a laparoscopic procedure and then you
we sent
twice before continuing with laparoscopy, right? Yeah.
We sent the cyst wall for frozen. We sent the cyst wall for frozen. They said borderline papillary cystadenoma. So
that's different from malignancy, right? That's borderline.
It is different, but when you discuss it with the parents and we tell them that you might need another second surgery or might need another extensive surgery, they said, okay, let's go ahead and do a salpingo-oophorectomy. Because if it is a borderline, then the surgery is done for her case, for a young patient. But if the final diagnosis is well-differentiated adenocarcinoma, then the options are laid down to the patient and accordingly. This was a referral case, Dr. Shalini. It was not my case.
Okay. Yeah. I just was curious to know what you did with the malignancy patient, right?
Yeah. At that time, only salpingo-oophorectomy.
Yeah, otherwise, good collection of cases and well managed. Very good. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I have one question. Can I ask to the second presenter? Actually, where there was metastasis to the abdominal wall, that is adenosquamous carcinoma, right? And she received 7 cycles of chemotherapy.
Yeah.
So why the 7 cycles, I mean to say, was the standard of the care in her case? Did you modify the standard of care of the chemotherapy, or was there any concern for 7 instead of 6?
This is a standard protocol. So they all recommend, oncologists, they recommend the 7 cycles. That is why it was given 7 cycles.
Normally, Chandra, it's about 6 cycles or 9 cycles or 4 cycles. 7 is a little uncommon, Dr. Rama said.
This is recommended in literature.
I think the standard of care most of the time is 6 cycles of the chemotherapy, because even if we are giving 7 cycles or the 9 cycles, doesn't make any difference. And what was the ER-PR status of your patient, though it was adenosquamous carcinoma?
It was positive. They were positive. More of the ER and progesterone, progesterone were less. Squamous
So did you
element was
choose
brain.
giving her, did
Sorry?
you choose giving her tamoxifen, or you can say any kind of hormone therapy after completion, because she already had the metastatic disease and she had high risk features of the nodal positivity, though she did receive the radiation therapy.
She received the radiation. I said that. She received
No,
the
no.
radiation.
Dr. Rama's asking that she's
hormonal treatment.
Yeah, I think
She was on
Rama, you have a
hormonal.
point there. She has just finished the radiotherapy. The brachy, she's just
Okay.
finished. And I think I take your point as a priority. We may have to give her that. You see.
Chandra, another question, and it was an endometrial. You want to ask Dr. Rama? Dr. Rama, you.
No, I just wanted to comment. It was a wonderful case, very interesting case, and very rarely you find, the kind of the lesion that too into the abdominal wall. And I think it's very, very interesting. Majority of the time we think that it is well differentiated carcinoma of the endometrium. It is not going to metastasize anywhere else. But finally, the histology was also adenosquamous. So I think, and this was managed very well, I think. Wonderful case.
See, that's where we went around. I mean, somebody asked me when we were discussing the case, my own team asked me, why did you do a biopsy of the mass when you had pelvic? I said, I never even in my wildest dream dreamt that this could be malignant. It was a soft, we thought it's a desmoid lipoma and something like that. And we never even thought that she would have adenocarcinoma, 3 months history. We thought at best she'll be AUP.
There was hardly a small growth at the fundus. Even at the time of hysteroscopy, we were not sure that this is a growth. When report came, then we thought, oh, this is adenocarcinoma.
But you see, they have been reported, they have been reported solitary, and she gave the reasons why her abdominal wall, it has been reported, But
and were the margins of the sarcoma, how were the margins?
You see, the tumor was in the abdominal wall on the parietal peritoneum, pushing the peritoneum, omentum was adherent to it. She had one previous cesarean, and even the ovary sort of was stuck, whether due to previous. So we were very keen to know whether she has the area of the metastasis where. But you see, everything was negative. The omentum was negative. Ovary was negative. The peritoneum which we cut, we made a big.
No, in this case, I wanted to know how much of the margin was removed. In this, the one you excised, the peritoneal this thing. How much of the margin?
2 centimeters. Easy to, maybe more. Maybe
2 centimeters.
In fact, we had to put a little bit something control the defect, and she may even get a hernia now. That huge lateral defect she had. But everything was negative. Even there was no lymphovascular invasion. You see, and that is it. But 2 nodes were positive. 2 pelvic nodes. Sorry. Somebody wanted to say something.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
I must say all the cases were so nice, and I must say timely presented, discussion beautiful. Hats off to your team, and with the excellent bulletin. And what a large series as far as the torsion is concerned, I would say very well managed. And one thing which was beautifully said, it is the suspicion. Quite often the radiology is not helpful, because we had a case in a 13-year-old girl on a Sunday, and the radiologist said, why not wait? We said the pain is acute. She must be having a torsion. Did laparoscopy with Dr. Lalita Badwar, 3 torsions, and there was a huge para-ovarian cyst. Both the tube as well as the ovary had undergone a torsion, and followed her up for the 4 years, and this child started menstruating also, and the ovaries were nice. But a lovely presentation. It was an excellent read. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am Bakshi. Good to see you and good to hear you after a very long time.
Good evening, ma'am Bakshi. Pleasure to hear your voice.
Good evening to all of you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Dr. Bakshi. Nice to hear you. As everybody else said.
Good evening.
And all these things with your really good discussions and comments and clinical pearls.
We were about to ask Dr. Bakshi to give her expert comments, and ma'am spontaneously said that is very sweet of her. Ma'am, Dr. Gujral, ma'am, there's Dr. Meera Agnihotri also who's joined us. I think maybe
Yeah.
ma'am can also say a few words.
Sure.
Dr. Meera Agnihotri.
Let's see her on the screen.
Kanpur, from Kanpur.
Kanika can't see her on the screen. Can't hear her as well.
Kanika, I just want to highlight two things, about ovarian torsions, So what we only think of, pain, majority of these patients, when they're coming after 2 days or 3 days, they have constipation. They are not able to pass letters. They are not unable to eat. That's another thing which we should keep in our mind, as ma'am says, you have to have a high suspicion. But if you take their history, they will always say acute pain. She's not able to pass motion. Because, in all my 7 cases, at least 5 of them had this problem.
Yeah, probably peritoneal irritation.
Very good point.
Yes, ma'am, that usually is seen. And ma'am, Dr. Asmita Rathore hasn't asked her question. Yes, ma'am.
All the cases were very nice, interesting, rare. I think most of the people have added. I have nothing more to add on to comments. But I like to congratulate Team Gangaram for this beautiful selection of cases and nice presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
And congratulations to you, Asmita, as the president of the NARCHI.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Your blessings are very much required.
We are there with you.
Sure, Asmita. We'll take it very great heights. Good to see you. We close, Kanika.
Hanji, ma'am, I just wanted to propose a vote of thanks.
Yeah, please do that.
Shall I? Yeah. So it's my honor and privilege to be proposing this vote of thanks on the last AOGD monthly meeting of the year 2020. I thank Dr. Gujral and our team at SGRH for presenting such wonderful cases, very rare cases and interesting ones, which were managed to perfection. Thank you, ma'am. And I would like to thank Dr. Chandra, who presented, one of the first speakers, who presented a case of endometrial CA with atypical metastasis, a very rare case. Dr. Sharmishta Garg, for presenting a case of postmenopausal lady with cervicovaginal agenesis with a rare form of mixed Müllerian mesenchymal epithelial tumor. Dr. Tarun Das, for presenting a case of pregnancy with CA esophagus, yet another rare case. And Dr. Punita Bhardwaj for presenting a case series of laparoscopic ovarian salvage and oophoropexy in adnexal torsions. So thanks to all the speakers. And I would like to thank all our judges, Dr. Shalini Rajaram, Dr. Asmita Rathore, Dr. Manju Khimani, and Dr. Rama Joshi for sparing their valuable time to take out time and judge the cases, as well as giving their expert comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mala, and everyone. Really enjoyed.
Thank you,
So
ma'am.
I'll have to leave for the OR, so I think I just take a leave. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
ma'am.
Thanks
you.
everyone for
Bye,
joining.
Kanika.
And I thank
Bye-bye.
all the executive
Thank
members
you.
and the delegates, and I can see we have national delegates also. Dr. Sali from Kathmandu, Dr. Chandan Dubey from
International.
UAE. Yeah, we have international delegates also today logged in. So I thank them, and I thank Dr. Mala, Dr. Mamta, and Team AOGD for organizing this event with the Jackson Pal, who's the media partner today with us, arranging all the platform and giving to us, Dr. Deepika, Dr. Vipin Tyagi, and the Team Jackson Pal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gujral, Dr. Mala and team. Nice to see you, Manju. And
Hi, Shalini.
yeah, hi. And it was a good meeting. And thank you, Deepika. Yeah, you can.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of Jackson Pal, makers of Lycored soft gels, having anti-oncogenic properties. Also, we have Maintain, let her dreams not get shattered. Injection Maintain 500 and 250.
Don't do that.
And Maintain tablets, L-ilestanol 5 mg, the only progestogen approved by US FDA for preterm birth. Dynogest 2 mg tablets for medical management of endometriosis as Endoreg. Newly launched Algos Spas tablets containing rotavirin and mefenamic acid, and also calcium tablets newly launched as Nari Cal. My teammates, Dr. Vipin Tyagi and Mr. Amit Saxena, join me to thank all of you experts, and the attendees present with us today. We assure our extended support to all your future activities also. Do remember us. We hope to see you in our next webinar, which is tomorrow, and also on 1st of Jan, which will be the next clinical meeting of AOGD. Thank you so much.